All right, we are live.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Government Operations and Military Affairs. It is Thursday morning, just after 9 a.m., and we are doing some more testimony and from witnesses on Public Records Act. We have a couple of people are on a tight timeline, so we're going to start off with our guest on Zoom, Tommy Gardner, who is the publisher of Vermont Community Newspaper Group. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Trying to turn my video on. Hold on one sec. Start video. There you go. Hello. Good morning.
Hi, Tommy.
Hi, Representative Shea Waters. Shea Waters. I see another local representative, Boyd, in there. Hello, Lucy. So yeah, thanks for asking me to come here. It's I was asked fairly late minute, so I've got a ton of thoughts, swirling in my head. I've been a journalist, in Vermont for 20 years, and so but having to put it down on paper is kind of what I do as a reporter. So I did that, and I'll just take it away. This is my first time testifying in a House committee or any kind of committee. So excuse my stutters and ums and ands. So my name's Tommy Gardner. As I said, I'm the editor of the Vermont Community Newspaper Group. We publish 5 hyper-local community weeklies. We have the News and Citizen in Lamoille County, the Stowe Reporter, the Other Paper of South Burlington, the Shelburne News, and the Citizen of Charlotte and Heinsberg. And I've been the editor-in-chief of these papers for a little over a year now. And I regularly hear the experience of my reporters in their efforts to seek public records. But before last year, I've been a reporter, as I said, in Vermont for 20 years. And I made a lot of public records requests in my day. And I've used all manner of request methods. I've used everything from the terse emails citing 1 VSA 316 chapter and verse to, hey, John, can I get a copy of that thing you guys are talking about at the select board meeting last night? The way I've always been taught about it, as far as public records go, is if you're a public official and I ask you for something, whether it's through the email or over the phone or via text message or just bumping into you at a meeting or in line for coffee, that's a public records request. I still haven't found anywhere in the public records laws that require a person, whether a journalist or a citizen, to deliver their public records requests in any particular method with any particular legal verbiage. Although I, oftentimes know that agencies and government officials do prefer them to be a little more formal, but oftentimes it's, the informal request is a great way to get things started, and that's usually the way I do it. I thought it might be helpful, I guess, to provide some examples of public records. Like I said, I've done countless of them, and a lot of in a lot of journalists have to put on that, that not just their journalist hat, but also their local, ordinary citizen hat. And so a few examples, a handful of examples, the meeting minutes for last week's school board meeting, showing who was in attendance and what policies were discussed, what actions were taken, or the information packet for tomorrow's select board meeting, the same one that all the select board members are looking at and thumbing through during the open session so we can all follow along at home. A lister card for that property on Main Street to see what the town appraises it for and how many bathrooms it has. The voter checklist from town meeting day to see which school board members voted on the budgets and which ones stayed home. The highway department's salt and sand expenditures over the past 5 years, particularly these past 2 winters. The number of deer hunting and moose archery permits issued by the Fish and Wildlife Department, a death certificate, campaign finance reports, property deeds, cemetery grave plots, a list of zoning permit applications received in the past 12 months, the town's noise ordinance, the school's anti-bullying policy, high school sports team rosters, graduation programs, budget spreadsheets galore, right down to the most granular line items. salaries of every municipal or school district employee, union contracts, police incident, arrest, and traffic ticket logs, which list the basic when, where, what, and who of every police interaction. This is something that at least 3 of our local police departments send us on a weekly basis without, yes, even having to ask at this point. These are all public records, and they're all things that I can get on a regular basis from any town hall or supervisory union office, often simply by swinging by or shooting off a quick email asking, may I have this? I didn't include on that list other public records that we as journalists or citizens request, things like public officials, emails correspondences, criminal charging affidavits, pre-arraignment, internal investigations of public employees, even after the investigation wraps, demographic student information, police body cam footage, electric power purchase agreements, bid proposals, contract negotiations. With all those things, it's often understandable that a little time is needed to scan them for things like social security numbers, names of minor children, and trade secrets or other public information. The key phrase here, though, I think is a little time. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of notifications here. The recently formed Vermont Journalism Coalition, I sit on its public policy committee, has recently supplied testimony opposing the Vermont League of Cities and Towns proposals for revisions to the public records laws. Those include extending the time to 14 days to simply respond to a public records request. This seems to make less sense as more and more municipalities, school districts, and government agencies communicate via email. Already, the law allows for 3 days to reply and a 10-day extension for complicated requests, something that can already provide a significant barrier to the public's access to its government. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm looking for information on that, say that burglary down my street, I don't want to wait for nearly a month if the custodian of that information decides to take the maximum time allowed to respond to my request. Or if I'm on the fence about how to vote on my school budget, I don't want to wait till after town meeting day at this point to find out how much the school district's paying for its support staff or spending on its basketball uniforms if it takes the maximum amount of time to respond to a public records request. And I'm also skeptical about the proposal to allow municipalities to, quote, recover the true cost of producing records and redaction. In an era when the vast majority of public records are digitized, I think it takes very little time and effort to, quote, produce the record. And when most people have, or at least have access to a smartphone, it shouldn't cost anything to inspect records in town hall or at the courthouse and just take smartphone photos of those documents, saving everybody their time. Simply put, erecting a paywall to public information places an undue financial burden on people to access their government and get the information they need and hold their public servants accountable. I grew up in small town Vermont, mainly Morrisville and Hyde Park, with my college years all the way over in Johnson. And I've worked as a journalist for 2 decades in Vermont, largely in these same communities. And I personally know and have worked with innumerable public servants. I get that they're often overworked and understaffed. And personally, I do my best to make sure my public records are casual, polite, and friendly, and I only turn to more formal means when those methods won't suffice. I know it's not the case with everyone. I know that the VLCT also proposes that the public records laws be changed to provide, quote, relief from vexatious requests, as if those types of requests are the norm instead of the exception, which I think is still more likely. And as the Vermont Journalism Coalition pointed out in its testimony, I think we can all probably think of a handful of folks in our communities who harangue public officials and who might as well cast a fishing net in the town hall to see what they drag out. But I don't think it's wise to change legislation based on a relatively small number of people who make headaches for public officials. Heck, I know myself and my fellow reporters have annoyed plenty of public officials in our dogged requests for public information too. In nearly 2 decades of reporting, I've rarely, if ever, been charged a dime for my requests. I think that's partly because of my obvious charming personality, but it's also partly because public officials are seriously, by and large, helpful, civic-minded individuals who've already given this stuff out to X number of people last week. So I guess why not me? That's really all I had to say right now. I don't know how this works, if that's just a testimony or if you guys ask me questions or if I did what I'm supposed to do.
Your instincts are true, sir. It's a little bit of both. So if you have that written down, if you could send that to us, that would be great, to our committee assistant, what you just is that your statement?
Sure, I can clean it up a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah. Do whatever you gotta do to like tighten it up, however you want for, us to post on our committee page today. That'd be very, very appreciated. And I know you're on a tight timeline and we have another guest who's on a tight timeline. So I want to afford her like, about 15 minutes. So that means we have 2 minutes for Q&A for you, sir. Questions from the table for our guest from the. Yes, Rep. Boyd.
Thank you, Tommy. Wondering, you gave a lot of really great examples of typical requests that you all request from folks. Wondering if you could give us maybe an average number of weekly requests.
I mean, if it comes, when it comes to when I was a reporter, if I had, 5 stories, I probably had, unless I was just sitting and recording a minute, on a meeting or doing a profile. I mean, it was probably, 5 requests per week. I mean, there's certain more, in-depth reporting, particularly this time of year, even simple things like budget proposals, or budget, like we have one town that wasn't even, it was just dragging its feet on getting us information on departmental budgets after the select board had approved the budget. And they were deferring more to like, their executive summary and their pie charts and all that stuff that they were handing out. But what we really wanted, the granular stuff. We wanted to know how much the departments were spending. And then, like a lot of times public records are simple things like the voting tallies or something like that. So I mean, when it comes to what a public records request, little ones, countless per month, per year. Larger ones, when it comes to requesting things that we know are going to take some time, like criminal investigations are a big one, or contract negotiations or internal investigations. It's an understanding that those will take a little time. And so, but we kind of work almost like a juggling act. We get the things that we can get immediately to work on what we're working right now. And then we kind of work along with how long it takes us to get the other ones to work on stories down the road. We're always kind of working in 2 different planes.
Anything else from our guests from Stowe? No. Thank you very much for your time, sir. Really appreciate your willingness to be here. Congratulations on your first slug of testimony.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to do what I'm more comfortable with and go up to the mountain right now. So
no, good on you. Good on you. No, we had a couple of people in here yesterday on another matter who hadn't testified before. So we're breaking in a lot of the public this week. It feels good to have the participation.
All right. So, I'll take the training wheels off. Thanks, folks.
Well, careful. Next thing you know, you're gonna have lawn signs. That's how they got me.
So, yeah.
All right. Thank you. With that, wow, we nailed the time on that. Next up, we have Kim McManus. How you doing, Kim?
Well, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
And I apologize. I have about 10 minutes because I need to be in Senate Judiciary at 9:30.
No worries.
And I'm happy to come back though if we leave any. We probably might leave a few loose ends.
Okay.
For the record, my name is Kim McManus. I'm the legislative and policy attorney for the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. I am also their records officer, which means I respond to the public records requests for our central office across the street, but also for all 14 state's attorneys' offices. When there's a straightforward public records request, our county offices can handle that on their own, but they will check in with me. If anything needs to be withheld or redacted, I am looped in and I'm managing that, the more complicated requests. Our most common requests that we receive are often for pending cases, and those get very complicated on the response for that. If releasing the information is going to interfere with the investigation or impact the ability to have a fair and impartial trial for the defendant. We get many requests for closed cases. That's much more straightforward. And we get a lot of requests for our communications. Communications between attorneys and law enforcement, communications between attorneys, sometimes communications between victims and our office. As you might imagine, there's a lot of sensitive information in our documents and our emails. And so when we receive a request, I appreciate the reporter who is just speaking that it shouldn't take that much time. It takes a lot of time. I have 4 requests came in last Friday. One of them involves, I think the poll was about 100 emails for one request. I need to read all of those emails. I cannot just release them without reviewing them, and that takes a lot of time. The body worn camera and dash camera, when records are requested involving cases that we have that information. First, I need to check in with the agency created those records to see if they have any exemptions that apply. And then I need to review that camera footage. Each officer sometimes has 3 different views. Now, once I get the sense of what's going on, I don't have to necessarily view the back of the car, the front of the car. And sometimes I do, depending on what's going on. And that is hours upon hours of footage. One other thing I will point out, our state government computers are not always able to handle the downloading and uploading of these videos. So just a few weeks ago, I had a situation where, county state's attorney's office sent me a zip file of videos to look through. I had to download them onto my computer to view them. My computer crashed multiple times while trying to go through that exercise to be able to view them. So just some pieces of why these things take more time and do the other parts of my job. Records is not the only part of my job. And requesters don't often want to hear that, especially during the legislative session, that I don't have 8 hours a day, 5 days a week to be looking through all of these files. So that's just a piece on why this takes time. A few other things I just wanted to mention. My understanding is that you all are exploring public records in general. And so I just wanted to point out a few items for you to consider. One of the areas I mentioned up front is that one of our exemptions is if releasing a record pending a trial would have an impact on the trial, would prevent a defendant from having a fair and impartial trial. There was an entry order in March 2025 in Washington County. And the case is fairly focused because it had to do with arrest materials, which there is an exception to the exception that arrest materials are usually released pretty quickly without any other exception being involved. Those arrest materials were not released right away, and a discussion takes place in the case, and I shared the site with the chair, and you all can take a look at it and chat with the legislative council about it. But essentially the entry order out of Washington County said that we essentially would need to show like unequivocally why this would impact a trial. Not that it could, but that it would, the way our statute's written. And that's a very high bar to say precisely why this will impact a trial in 3 months, 6 months. So I just wanted to highlight that we're concerned about that. It's an entry order right now. It's only out of 1 county, but it does concern us a bit from our department because we do not believe that it's appropriate to release almost any records before the disposition of the trial, except for the arrest record. Another thing to point out to you all, if you're aware of the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, which regulates law enforcement officers in the state, once an internal investigation goes to the Criminal Justice Council, by statute, that investigation, all those materials are confidential when they're at the council until the council issues a decision. Right now, folks can public records request a law enforcement agency or a town and ask for that internal investigation. And many are given guidance, and I think it's right under the law that's out there right now, that they need to release that record, even though if you went to the Criminal Justice Council, they cannot release that record, and it's the same records. So it's something to look at. Those records are confidential until a decision is made, but you can kind of go back around to the original agency and request the record.
So you're saying CJC has the exemption, but the same records can be requested through the municipality or law enforcement at the local level?
Correct. That's what we've seen happen a few times. So something to just take a look at if you truly want, as under the VCJC statute, keep those records confidential until a decision is made, then it would be nice to sew that up on the other end and not have that back end. The other piece, I mentioned the time that it takes, no doubt you've heard that repeatedly. The last thing I wanted to mention is we have been seeing what appear to be computer generated public records requests. And that's just concerning. We need to honor them and reply to them. But again, from a volume standpoint, that just becomes very difficult. I will often email the email that's listed just to ask for clarification. Half the time I hear back from a human, half the time I do not. So that's just something to note. Whether we're going to see more of that or not, I don't know.
So with that, like you're presuming it's an AI generated request, but then when you respond, it seems like you're getting a response when you do get one from an entity that seems to be more human.
Yes, so
You can tell within, more human, right?
but there's some human behind generation versus just spamming out requests.
Gotcha.
And the last piece, often from just a big picture statewide resource point of view, if the agency in our situation, if the law enforcement agency involved in the situation is being requested, I'm being requested, maybe Vermont State Police, if they had a piece in it, are being requested, there's 3 different records officers running around, pulling around all the same things. And if we might not know that for a few days, it just sometimes there's a real inefficiency built in there that folks should be aware of. And again, big picture, we are state employees. We understand the transparency needs and we usually, our office bends over backwards to comply with that. But there is a real strain on us to respond in the current time limits.
And I just bird dogged the clock and you got 4 minutes.
Yes, to get done.
Stop on the train. Okay, no, thank you for that. And we'll definitely reach out to you if we decide to want to dig a little bit deeper into your experiences. So
wonderful. Thank you so much for discussing this.
Yes.
I don't need to ask the question. I don't think it would be fair. So I feel like the answer would be yes. But I wanted to point out that it does not seem to me, based on her testimony, like the problem is the requests. It's that they're not, people who are obligated to do this aren't being given the resources that they need, like additional staff or better technology. That, sometimes throwing money at a problem does not work, but it seems like in this case, funding it more appropriately might ease the burden on them and allow them to comply with requests better. That's just something I was thinking about based on what she just said.
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, that's definitely one of the components that we're in is being under-resourced and understaffed. That's
Yeah.
Mr. Martin, how are you?
Great. And Hannah's gonna.
What's that?
Hannah's gonna.
Oh, please, yes, yeah, please, both of you come up.
Yeah, I've got another chair. Oh, you got it? Sorry to make you move furniture.
Hello,
Welcome. Maybe.
I'm Charles Martin, the Deputy Secretary at ANR.
I'm Hannah Smith, the General Counsel with the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
So we just wanted to come in to talk a little bit about our agency's experience with public records. I want to be very clear and genuine from the get-go. We have no interest in limiting transparency. It's a different conversation, but if I had my way, we might even have more transparency if it meant that our staff obligations could be reduced. So that is not the intent here at all. We disclose everything we can as quickly as possible. But that said, I think the idea that the majority of these requests are somewhat routine is probably true. I mean, we receive hundreds and hundreds of requests, multiple requests a day. Oftentimes they are easy to action. I was a records custodian at my previous state agency, and we got a lot of like business reports, sales reports, requests, things like that that are very routine. Generally pretty easy to action. Requests from the media reporters, again, they're usually pretty narrow because people are on a timeline and they want to have their story printed, and generally pretty easy to action. I think where we see a lot more volume and burden on staff, and not just records custodian, everyone up to the general counsel for the agency and the secretary or myself searching through records, are from well-resourced lobbying organizations or individuals who have a right to use the PRA, but from where I'm sitting are using it maybe in a way that might align with the contemplated vexatious requests definitions that are being floated around. So some of these, just for purposes of perspective, and Hannah will kind of go into some of the more explicit details, can take, we had, at ANR, we have a lot of organizations who look at our work, petroleum interests, et cetera, well-resourced lobbying organizations. Some of these requests have taken up to 3 or 4 days of full-time work by senior general counsel just to assemble on behalf of the organizations. And those are pretty broad. Sometimes for organizations that I think have kind of chosen to demonize the agency and perpetuate sort of a narrative, we'll get very large requests. I think someone said like fishing expedition, we'll get like the name of a species, and every time we've ever mentioned it, things that are just incredible volumes of records that need to be searched and sifted through. So this can be a huge burden on staff. We don't have any staff member that's specifically full-time a records custodian. It's a component of a couple of people's jobs. But I'm sure, and I tried to bring this to the committee because I wanted to kind of demonstrate it more specifically, but I'm sure that the contemplated portion of FTEs that we have for this effort does not actually align with the amount of hours we're putting into the effort, nor do those personnel compensation rates align with the potential financial recourse that we can lawfully ask for or request for from the requesters. So the rates are kind of low, and there's also activities that we can't charge for. I know that we're not in here to talk about it, but there's a bill that Representative Lipsky introduced, H 502, that will allow for billable time for physical inspection of documents. I bring that up because we will dedicate, if we assemble documents on a laptop and people come in to physically inspect them, or a stack of physical papers, we have some sort of custodian in that room with those people. So if it takes an 8-hour session or 2 days or something for people to go through all of our records, there's a state employee who's being compensated for those 2 days to just be in the room with the people examining the records, because they're using state equipment in a state office, and we have obligations to have some sort of monitoring. So that's not a billable activity. 502 contemplates that activity, and just invite the committee to check that out if you're all interested. So really, again, just want to emphasize, not at all interested in limiting transparency, but to what was kind of touched on at the end of the last segment of testimony, I don't think the body of work, the obligations under the PRA as it stands right now create a body of work that I think is just not resourced. And I'm not necessarily asking for additional resources. I just want to really make that clear to the legislature that this is not aligning with the availability of our staff to do the actual job. And a product of that is the modernization of things, digitization, some of those automated requests you're hearing about. And I think, a lot of organizations who do this kind of full time. I'll hand it over to Hannah to go through, whatever you'd like to go through.
Sure, thanks. Charles covered a lot of our concerns, but I can illustrate, similar to the testimony Attorney McManus provided, we get requests that are slightly different. To Charles' point, we're getting requests that are more akin to discovery requests, looking for information rather than documents. And so the one example that Charles mentioned, where the agency general counsel, she's been over 30 hours reviewing documents after they've been requested. We're producing responses to requests that involve between 10 and 12,000 documents sometimes. And a lot of this is related to the fact that a public record is anything that's produced in the course of the agency's business. So it includes all email correspondence. We do get these requests that are looking for any record that contains a keyword. the name of a species, the word, the phrase climate change. And so just, I think that the scope of the response time involved in some of these requests sort of outweighs the available staff time that's contemplated in our records officers' daily work. Which we do the absolute best that we can to move as quickly as possible, but we often have, when we get these very voluminous requests, we have to request additional time beyond the 10 days. And it's not because we're trying to delay our response. It's simply because we could dedicate, the staff that might be implicated by this request could dedicate their entire day to searching their emails over the requested time period. And it would still take, over a week to even go through those emails. The other obligation that Attorney McManus highlighted was the fact that we have a competing obligation to protect records that are exempt. So that does mean that attorneys review, if you have 10,000 documents that you're producing, somebody has to review all of those and make sure that they don't contain information that's confidential or would otherwise violate somebody's right to privacy. In Fish and Wildlife in particular, we're dealing with both the law enforcement component and sort of the administrative agency component. So typically I have to reach out then to state's attorneys when records are requested that implicate a case that is ongoing or pending. So there are layers to this that just, I think, complicate the response time in a way that it's not an excuse at all. It's just the reality of the situation now that we're dealing with electronic records. We've been making a much more concerted effort to track our time. The agency doesn't charge for any response to records that takes under 4 hours. So, the vast majority of the records requests that the first witness identified, that's, no money is ever being collected in response to those. And we're not pedantic about the way that the requests come in. We understand that if someone asks for a record, we have an obligation, even if it's not written in a way that cites to the Public Records Act. To Charles' point about the inspection, that has been sort of a challenging loophole. I think the way that was written initially was the idea that it would be easier for somebody to come into the office and just look at a physical record. But again, because the majority of our records at this point are electronic, the same amount of staff time goes into compiling them and putting them on a hard drive for somebody to come in and inspect, and we don't recoup any costs for that time spent in production. So I think that would be potentially a really helpful, adjustment to the way that the Public Records Act is written to allow to collect staff time associated with compiling records, even when the requester is then going to come in and inspect rather than us sending them via some.
What you're saying is, in your experience producing hard copies for inspection or digital copies is still within the same scope of staff time?
Takes the same amount of time, right?
One is billable, one is.
Right. If we produce them via, we use like secure email exchanges, we can charge for staff time spent responding. But if they come in to inspect, we technically can't charge for that, even though the same amount of time has been committed to compiling all of the electronic.
There's aspects of the clock. It's also mentioning that are not, they're just not time that we're going to track. Like if we do get, like, someone wants every time the agency ever mentioned climate change, we will try to narrow that a little bit because it's just such a, kind of impossible request. And that might be 3 or 4 hours of attorney back and forth trying to come to some consensus with the requester, but that's again not compensated. So it really is just a tremendous amount of staff time. We did only start really dedicating ourselves to some tracking of our minutes in the last year, so we don't have a great representation yet of the full obligation for the agency, but it's a serious obligation.
The part where you spoke to some of these searches in the larger ones being more like discovery. I had a situation by the first PRR I was subject to in this place was last biennium. It was myself and the previous chair, and it was in and around cannabis policy, and it was a request by a newspaper, very high profile newspaper. And I believe it was, we were two individuals who were part of that request, but it was kind of what you were talking about, like, where it was just like kind of cannabis in general. And one of the things I was kind of sitting back waiting for is seeing like what they would produce as an article as a result of this. And I don't recall ever seeing anything ever actually generated with the massive sweep, right? And I'm just using that as like a lived example. And I just thought of that off the cuff after you brought up that discovery. Because I have heard from other folks that it feels like there's, especially now with AI, whether it be for the purpose of like research or for some of the testimony we received was in and around like bids, and contracts, and then trying to figure out how to position contracts and bids at a higher rate. That the information is now, we're just hearing a lot of things where the information is being used in a way where it's not just to divulge through media or an individual public into action within government, I guess.
And we're blind to the motivations of the requester as kind of a component of PRA. Certainly I can kind of intuit what the information might be used for, but it varies widely from Vermonter to, we have individual lobbying organizations that take up to 3 weeks of agency staff time annually just for to support their lobbying agenda essentially, which is fully within their rights, but it's, just another one of the suite of motivations that we might see.
Rep. Hooper.
Would it help if scope of what the information requested is narrow or to be more specific that people have fishing expedition just use it?
Yeah, Barb, can you speak up a little bit? I can't hear you.
Yeah. Would it help if we narrowed the parameters of what would be a valid request so that you're not looking for keywords, you're actually looking for something more specific?
Certainly would reduce the time we spend assembling the record if it's more narrow. But yeah, go ahead and speak to it.
Well, I also think that it would allow us to potentially produce the records that folks are really looking for.
Yeah.
I think that when we get these really broad requests, we're obligated to produce anything that might be responsive. And I have to believe that a lot of it is not actually responsive. But we don't, again, if the request is narrowed to something more specific, we're able to be more helpful, frankly.
For the record, I said fishing expedition, which I think is relevant.
The official wildlife as a pun or a term of art. Yes.
So what would be different in the way you would look for that information?
Well, I think that
What
often
would be ideal, maybe in request parameters?
if folks are looking for specific documents, that's always helpful rather than just records that reference a term. But I also am really hesitant off the cuff to articulate how things should be limited because transparency is the objective here. And so I'm not suggesting that there's no easy way, I think, to limit what can be requested statutorily, but we always try to correspond. I mean, we have an obligation to, under the statute, to correspond with the requester in order to try and better understand what they're requesting, which, as Charles mentioned, does take time. But when people are looking for specific documents, when they narrow the time frame, at least, when we get records requests sometimes that are like every record that's been produced since the year 2000. I mean, that in itself requires then somebody who has access to the archived email to go through things like that. I mean, and our records retention policy doesn't necessarily require retaining all of those records, but some of them, often they are retained. And so if they're in our possession, we have to go back through decades. So limiting things through the time, through the specific document types that they're requesting. I mean, all of those are really helpful for us and allow us to be more efficiently helpful.
And I think it'd be a mistake if I didn't mention another kind of burden on staff is the way that these come in. And again, not suggesting the committee do any one thing, but I want to just raise it. But we'll get requests that say, hey, you're an incompetent moron, produce these records for me. And And that's a completely lawful PRA, right? If there's anything buried in there, that's a coherent request for a document, we honor that. And for the staff that kind of receives this on a daily basis, and that's usually not like senior political appointees, you know, it's rank and file staff. It's not a good morale booster. It doesn't get you out of bed in the morning, you know, when you're expecting an inbox, all that stuff. I totally believe fully in sort of radical transparency in this space, but that is something that staff experiences on an almost daily basis at the agency.
Revenue.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you would envision working better, because you know, there's so many components of this that are important, but thinking about that this act was, I don't know, was it 70s after Watergate, or when we didn't have anything electronically, and the balancing the needs of the public for our agencies to do the work that we need them to do versus chasing down records. Do you have thoughts about how that could, you know, be reconstituted in the current digital world?
I think a good start would be to examine the intent of H502, which that's a good area to kind of, you know, I'll probably regret framing it this way, but I think if you're going to obligate the agency to 18 hours of sitting in a room with you, for instance, I think your interest in doing that is probably a little bit greater if there's no financial obligation to you for that time that public person's salary was paid to them during those 2 days. So I think looking at what is billable is maybe an area to kind of discourage people from this massive, you know, unending quests. Again, that works both ways, because I don't want, you know, under-resourced people who just want good records to be limited or hesitant to request them. But oftentimes when it's that person in a room for 8 hours, it's not sort of an individual Vermonter seeking records. It's usually a well-resourced organization with some attorneys. But we're still doing it for free as a state, which I think should be something the legislature contemplates.
So this is something that pops into my head from previous testimony, and this was at the municipal level. But with the billable requests that you have, do you have open invoices? Do people not collect? Do you have like the unpaid invoices that wind up hanging out? Because we did hear that at the municipal level, that they'll generate the request and then no one will pick up or make payment. Curious if that's.
I'm sure recouping payment problems have occurred, but
It can take time. We haven't run up against any refusal to pay. I think sometimes it takes repeated reminders. And again, most of the requests that we can fulfill in under 4 hours. So we're not issuing an invoice for those. I'm not aware of any instances where we've actually, you know, we always inform folks, like, you can challenge any of these to the secretary's office. I'm not aware of an instance where somebody has flat out refused to pay after they've received the records. Just to be clear, we are producing the records and then we're sending an invoice. So they could. And our recourse is pretty limited. I mean, I think that we can, if the same requester is coming in repeatedly but not paying anything, we would say we need to be able to recoup some of these costs pursuant to the Secretary of State's schedule of charges before we can respond to more records requests. We haven't come to that point yet.
Okay.
But it is administrative time that's also spent producing those invoices and following up, just to note that.
Well, yeah, there's the labor built into the process.
and just for context, the schedule of charges at the Secretary of State's office is often, you know, half the rate of the people doing this work. So you think of it as like balancing the budget from that perspective. You're kind of receiving a fee that covers less than half of the personnel time to do the thing.
Understood. So yeah, so the amount that you're the billable per hour does not match the actual
Personnel that
labor cost of
that the public is spending for that labor.
Brad Hooper.
Well, I'm sympathetic to that, having worked for the state for a long time. The person that's going through the files and bringing them out and blah, blah, blah. has another job to do that they're not doing, so the issue rolls out to other citizens who are not getting their stuff done. This is happening. Doubt that also if you said we're not gonna give you any more records until you pay us, the court wouldn't slap their hand pretty quickly.
I'm sure we would get feedback on that.
I missed that last part, Bob.
Say again,
The last part where.
I'd say the business about we can't give you records until you pay your bill, or would probably slap their hand.
Yeah, that doesn't, yeah. Let's see what time we got going here. Any more questions for our guests right now? We have some ample amount of time till our next testimony, but I do have a meeting in about 20 minutes that popped up. But do we have anything else for our guests from the Agency of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife?
We're happy to come back whenever this is ready. Just let us know.
Okay. Yes.
I know you said that you are not making a budget request. I want to be very clear that I understood that, but just hypothetically, if you had more staff to do this work and more support for technology and people to do it, would that ease the burden?
Yeah, I think I could speak for all of state government and say that this activity
Yeah.
is not resourced to reality. So I'll just leave it there, I guess. I don't want to, but yes, yeah, more resources would definitely ease the burden of not requesting more resources, but that's a factual statement. Yeah.
And if, I know that there are like particulars for every agency, department, like what the specifics are about what your processing of those records look like, but can you envision a way in which there was like a dedicated staff to public records requests that fulfilled requests for a variety of departments? Or is it so specific what you're doing that it really needs to be someone in your agency?
I think the considerations change. If you're primarily like a law enforcement or court-oriented agency, you might have
Yeah.
a different set of things that your records custodians are familiar with.
Mhm.
I think you're talking like kind of a central state repository for records. I don't know that I want to comment too heavily in there. It's kind of like an ADS. Some attorneys,
Yeah.
might want to go into that, but it would have to be a pretty knowledgeable set of custodians who had some fluency in everybody's business if they were going to be able to successfully do that. Especially, yeah.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions for our guests?
Thank you.
And we'll be back in got a good block of time here so we can get some work done on the other bills we're working on and work on lining up testimony for the other things we're speaking to this week and early next week. So we're gonna go off now and come back at 10:45 for 686, an acts relating to expanding identification of certain lobbying advertisements. Stay tuned, folks.